The sun shone brightly over New York City, promising a perfect day for the Thompson family. David, a dark-skinned businessman whose success was as evident as his elegant suit, adjusted his sunglasses as he watched his wife Sarah and daughter Emily exit the luxurious car parked in front of the zoo entrance. "Dad, hurry up!" exclaimed Emily, her eyes shining with excitement. At 10 years old, the girl radiated a contagious energy that contrasted with her parents' composure. Sarah, a woman of serene beauty, smiled as she took her daughter's hand. "Calm down, honey. The animals aren't going anywhere." David joined them, his imposing presence attracting glances from passers-by. Some were of admiration, others of curiosity, and a few, he noted with an internal sigh, of barely disguised disapproval. "Ready to see your tiger friends?" he asked, bending down to Emily's level. "Yes." The girl jumped for joy. "Do you think they'll recognize me?" Sarah laughed softly. "Honey, this is our first visit to the zoo, but I've seen them so many times on TV that I feel like I know them," Emily insisted. David exchanged a knowing look with his wife. Their daughter's imagination always surprised and proud them in equal measure. As they approached the ticket booth, David noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere. The security guard, a middle-aged man with a badge that read Mike, was watching them with an expression that made David instinctively tense. "Good morning," David greeted with a firm but friendly voice. "3 tickets, please." Mike, without responding to the greeting, scrutinized the family with a look that went beyond mere curiosity. His eyes stopped on David, then on Sarah, and finally on Emily, who, oblivious to the tension, was jumping with excitement. $75, Mike grunted, his tone curt. As David took out his wallet, he noticed Mike looking with surprise at the high-denomination bills. For a moment, it seemed he was going to say something, but he held back, limiting himself to handing over the tickets with an abrupt gesture. "Have a good day," Mike muttered, though his tone suggested otherwise. David took the tickets, determined not to let anything ruin this special day. "Thank you," he responded with a dignity that made Mike look away, uncomfortable. Once inside the zoo, Sarah approached her husband. "Are you okay, honey?" she whispered, gently squeezing his hand. David forced a smile. "Of course. I won't let anything cloud our happiness today." Emily, oblivious to the tension between the adults, was pulling on her mother's hand. "Let's see the monkeys first." As they progressed through the zoo paths, David couldn't help but notice the looks from other visitors. Some were of simple curiosity, others of admiration for his evident status, but some were too similar to Mike's for his comfort. However, Emily's joy was contagious. Her laughter resonated in the air as she imitated the monkeys, trumpeted like the elephants, and roared like a lion, drawing smiles even from the most serious observers. Sarah, always attentive, noticed the tension in her husband's shoulders. "David," she said quietly, "remember why we're here." For her, she gestured towards Emily, who was now pressing her nose against the glass of the penguin enclosure. Fascinated, David nodded, visibly relaxing. "You're right, as always," he said, softly kissing his wife's cheek. As they approached the tiger enclosure, Emily's excitement reached new heights. "Dad, Mom, look, there they are." The majestic felines paced gracefully behind the thick safety glass. Emily was hypnotized, her eyes following every movement of the tigers with wonder. "They're so beautiful," whispered the girl. "Can I get closer?" David looked around, noticing the lack of guards or zoo staff in the vicinity. Something in his instinct told him they should be cautious. "Wait a moment, Princess," he said, taking Emily's hand. "Let's see if we can find a guide who can tell us more about them." Just as they were about to look for a zoo employee, David saw a familiar figure approaching. It was Mike, the guard from the entrance. His expression was even more hostile than before, and he seemed to be specifically observing the Thompson family. David felt a pang of unease. Why was this guard following them? Was it simple curiosity or something more sinister? "Sarah," he murmured, "why don't you take Emily to see the parrots? I'll stay here for a moment." Sarah, catching the tension in her husband's voice, nodded. "Come on, honey," she said to Emily. "We'll come back to see the tigers in a moment." As Sarah and Emily walked away, David turned to face Mike. The guard stopped a few meters away, his gaze fixed on David. "Can I help you with something?" David asked, maintaining a cordial but firm tone. Mike seemed surprised for a moment, as if he didn't expect David to address him directly. Just doing my rounds," he muttered, averting his gaze. David took a step forward. "Sir, I've noticed you've been following us since we entered. If there's a problem, I'd like to know." Mike visibly tensed. "There's no problem," he snapped, "as long as you behave." The implication in his words was clear, and David felt anger growing inside him. However, years of experience in the business world had taught him to keep calm in tense situations. "I understand," David said, his voice calm but loaded with authority. "I appreciate your dedication to your job. However, I assure you that my family and I are law-abiding citizens, and we deserve the same treatment as any other visitor." Mike seemed momentarily disconcerted by David's measured response. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but at that moment, a shrill scream cut through the air. "Dad! Dad!" David's heart stopped for an instant. It was Emily's voice. Without saying another word, he turned and ran in the direction of the scream, leaving a confused and alarmed Mike behind. As he ran, 1,000 terrifying scenarios passed through David's mind. What had happened? Was Emily in danger? Where was Sarah? As he rounded a corner, he saw his daughter jumping with excitement in front of a cage, with Sarah by her side, smiling with relief as she saw David approach. "Dad, look!" exclaimed Emily. "A white tiger!" "I didn't know they had one here." David stopped, his heart still beating hard. Indeed, a majestic white tiger was watching them from behind the glass, its fur shining under the afternoon sun. "I'm sorry, honey," said Sarah, approaching her husband. "I couldn't contain her. She saw a poster about the white tiger and ran here before I could stop her." David took a deep breath, feeling the fear slowly dissipate. "It's okay," he said, hugging his wife. "Everything's fine." As they watched Emily marvel at the white tiger, David couldn't help but think about the encounter with Mike. He knew that this incident, though seemingly insignificant, was a reminder of the challenges his family faced, even in the happiest moments. However, looking at his daughter and wife, David promised himself that he would not allow prejudice or fear to cloud his family's happiness. This day at the zoo was just the beginning of a much bigger adventure, one in which they would have to face not only their own fears, but also the prejudices of a society that still had much to learn about equality and respect. With a mixture of determination and hope, David joined his family in front of the white tiger enclosure, ready for whatever the future held for them. The sun was beginning to descend on the horizon when the Thompson family decided to take a break at the zoo cafeteria. Emily, still brimming with energy, couldn't stop talking about all the animals they had seen, especially the white tiger. And his eyes. "Dad, did you see how he looked at me? I think he recognized me," exclaimed the girl, her eyes shining with excitement. David smiled, stroking his daughter's hair. "Maybe he did, Princess. Animals are smarter than we think." Sarah, who had been observing the surroundings cautiously, leaned towards her husband. "David," she whispered, "that guard, Mike, he's watching us again." Indeed, Mike was a few meters away, pretending to watch the visitors, but his gaze constantly drifted towards the Thompsons' table. David sighed. "Don't let it bother you, honey. We're here to enjoy ourselves." At that moment, a middle-aged man, dressed in an elegant suit, approached their table. His face showed a mixture of recognition and surprise. "David Thompson, is that you?" the man asked. David stood up, a smile of recognition lighting up his face. "Robert Parker. What a surprise." The two men hugged affectionately under the curious gaze of Sarah and Emily. "Family," said David. "Let me introduce you to Robert Parker. An old friend from college and now a respected biologist." Robert greeted Sarah and Emily warmly. "It's a pleasure to meet you. David, I didn't know you came around here. What brings you to the zoo?" "It's Emily's birthday," David replied. "She wanted to see the tigers." "Ah, the tigers!" exclaimed Robert with enthusiasm. "They're fascinating, aren't they? In fact, I'm working on a conservation project right here." Emily perked up instantly. "Really? Can you tell us more?" Robert sat down with them, and soon the conversation flowed animatedly. They talked about the conservation project, the importance of protecting endangered species, and the wonders of the animal world. Emily listened attentively, asking questions that impressed both Robert and her parents. As they talked, David noticed that Mike had moved even closer, apparently listening to their conversation. The guard's expression had changed from hostility to a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Robert, oblivious to the tension, continued talking. "You know, David, we're looking for sponsors for our project. With your business experience and passion for nature, you'd be perfect for—" Suddenly, Mike approached the table, interrupting the conversation. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tense, "but the cafeteria is about to close." Robert looked at his watch, surprised. "Oh my God, I didn't realize it was so late." "Well, David, it's been a pleasure seeing you. We should meet soon to talk more about the project." As they said goodbye, David couldn't help but notice Mike's confused look. It was evident that the guard was struggling to reconcile his prejudices with the reality of seeing David interact as an equal with someone like Robert. Once Robert left, the family prepared to depart. As they passed by Mike, David stopped for a moment. "Thank you for letting us know about the closing," he said kindly. "I hope you have a good night." Mike, visibly uncomfortable, just nodded in response. As they walked towards the exit, Sarah squeezed David's hand. "That was very mature of you," she whispered. David smiled weakly. Sometimes, the best way to combat prejudice is with kindness. As they reached their car, Emily, tired but happy, fell asleep almost instantly in the back seat. David and Sarah exchanged looks of love and pride. "It's been an interesting day," Sarah commented as David started the car. "Certainly," he replied, "but I'm glad Emily was able to enjoy it without perceiving the tension." As they drove away from the zoo, David couldn't help but think about the encounter with Robert and Mike's reaction. He knew that his success in business had allowed him to move in circles that many would consider inaccessible to someone of his skin color. However, days like today reminded him that there was still a long way to go. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, noticing her husband's thoughtful expression. "About Robert's project," David replied after a pause. "I think it could be an interesting opportunity." Sarah smiled. "Are you thinking of getting involved?" "Maybe," said David. "It could be a way to make a difference, not just for the animals, but also to change perceptions." As they drove through the illuminated streets of New York City, David began to envision an idea. Perhaps this day at the zoo wasn't just a family outing, but the beginning of something bigger. An opportunity to challenge stereotypes, to show that success and compassion know no skin color. "You know," he finally said, "I think we should invite Robert to dinner next week. I'd like to hear more about that project." Sarah nodded in approval. "I think that's an excellent idea, and I'm sure Emily will love it." As the car glided through the streets, David felt a mixture of excitement and determination. The day had been a reminder of the challenges they faced, but also of the opportunities they had to make a difference. And he was determined to make the most of that opportunity. What David didn't know was that his decision to get involved in the zoo project would trigger a series of events that would test not only his determination, but also the bonds of his family and the perceptions of an entire community. Meanwhile, at the zoo, Mike was closing the gates, his mind still spinning from the day's events. The image of David, successful and respected, clashed with his deep-rooted prejudices. For the first time in a long time, he began to question his own beliefs. Little did Mike know that his actions in the coming days would have far-reaching consequences, not just for the Thompson family, but for the entire zoo and beyond. As night fell over New York City, the seeds of change had already been planted. The zoo visit, which had begun as a simple family outing, had become the catalyst for a transformation that no one could have foreseen. And as Emily dreamed of white tigers and adventures, her parents were preparing unknowingly to face challenges that would test their love, courage, and determination to create a better world for their daughter. The Thompsons' story was just beginning, and the New York City Zoo was about to become the stage for a drama that would capture the attention of the entire nation. A week after the zoo visit, the Thompson residence was buzzing with activity. Sarah was overseeing the final details of the dinner while David adjusted his tie in front of the hallway mirror. Emily, dressed in her best dress, couldn't stop pacing around the living room, excited about Robert Parker's visit. "Do you think he'll bring pictures of the tigers, Dad?" Emily asked for the umpteenth time. David smiled, patting his daughter's head. "I don't know, Princess. But I'm sure he'll have many interesting stories to tell you." The doorbell rang and Emily ran to open the door, closely followed by her parents. Robert appeared on the threshold, with a wide smile and a briefcase under his arm. "Welcome, Robert," exclaimed David, shaking his friend's hand. "Thank you for the invitation," Robert replied, handing a bottle of wine to Sarah. "It's a pleasure to be here." The dinner proceeded in a warm and friendly atmosphere. Between bites, Robert shared fascinating anecdotes about his work at the zoo, captivating Emily with stories of animal rescues and conservation projects. "The problem is that we need more funds," explained Robert, his face turning serious. "The zoo is going through financial difficulties and some crucial projects are at risk." David leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of projects?" "Well, for example, our breeding program for endangered tigers," Robert responded. "It's vital for the conservation of the species, but it requires resources that the zoo can barely afford." "They can't close the tiger program," exclaimed Emily, her eyes full of concern. Sarah gave her daughter an understanding look before turning to Robert. "Is there anything that can be done?" Robert sighed. "We're looking for private investors, but it's not easy. Most companies prefer projects with more immediate returns." David remained silent for a moment, his mind working quickly. Finally, he spoke. "Maybe I can help. My company is always looking for corporate social responsibility opportunities. What do you say if we schedule a meeting next week to discuss the possibilities?" Robert's eyes lit up. "Are you serious?" "That would be wonderful, David." While the adults discussed the details, Emily listened attentively, her young mind already imagining a future where her father saved the tigers. The next day, David arrived early at his office, determined to start working on the proposal to help the zoo. However, he had barely sat down when his assistant, Laura, entered with a worried expression. "Mr. Thompson, there's something you should see," she said, handing him a tablet. David frowned as he read the headline of an online local newspaper. "Controversial businessman seeks to take control of the city zoo." The article, full of insinuations and half-truths, suggested that David was using his influence to take over the zoo for selfish motives. "Who published this?" David asked, his voice tense. "The author is anonymous," Laura replied, "but the newspaper is known for its connections to the Harrison family." David leaned back in his chair, processing the information. The Harrisons were an influential family in the city, known for their conservatism and resistance to change. They had been David's competitors in several businesses and had never hidden their dislike for his success. "This could complicate things," David murmured. At that moment, his phone rang. It was Robert. "David," Robert's voice sounded agitated. "Have you seen the news? The zoo's board of directors is in panic. Some members are questioning the wisdom of associating with you." David closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the situation. "Stay calm, Robert. We'll handle this. Can you arrange a meeting with the board as soon as possible?" After hanging up, David stared out his office window, observing the bustle of the city. He knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. Not only would he have to fight against prejudice and misinformation, but also against powerful interests that felt threatened by his success. Meanwhile, at the zoo, Mike was reading the article with mixed emotions. On one hand, the accusations against David resonated with his own prejudices. On the other, he remembered the kindness and dignity David had shown during his visit. The confusion was eating at him. "What's wrong, brother?" asked a voice behind him. It was Tom, the zoo owner and Mike's older brother. "Nothing," Mike muttered, quickly closing the newspaper page on his phone. Tom looked at him suspiciously. "I know you, Mike. Something's bothering you." "Does it have to do with that businessman, Thompson?" Mike hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I don't know what to think of him, Tom. The article says one thing, but when he was here—" "Don't be fooled," Tom interrupted, his voice hard. "People like him always have a hidden motive. I won't allow him to take over our zoo." While the brothers were arguing, they didn't notice Emily's presence, who had come to the zoo with her mother for a surprise visit to Robert. The girl, hidden behind a bush, listened to the conversation with wide, frightened eyes. "Mom," Emily whispered, tugging at Sarah's sleeve, "why are those men talking bad about Dad?" Sarah, who had also overheard, felt her heart racing. She knew they had to get out of there before things got even more complicated. "Let's go, sweetie," she said quietly, taking Emily's hand. "I think we'll have to visit Robert another day." As they quickly walked away, Sarah took out her phone to call David. She knew that what they had just heard could change everything. In his office, David was preparing for the battle ahead, unaware that his wife and daughter were about to bring him information that would add a new dimension to his struggle. The zoo visit, which had begun as a happy family day, had become the catalyst for a storm that threatened to shake the foundations of the Thompsons' lives and the entire community. As the sun set over New York City, the pieces of a larger conflict began to move. David, Sarah, and Emily found themselves at the center of a plot that went far beyond the walls of the zoo, a plot that would test their love, integrity, and determination. The fight for the zoo was about to begin, and no one could foresee the impact it would have on the lives of all involved. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when David Thompson entered the zoo's boardroom. The tension was palpable. The members of the board of directors looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Robert, seated in a corner, offered him a tense smile of support. "Good morning, gentlemen," David began, his voice firm and serene. "I appreciate the opportunity to clarify recent misunderstandings." An older man with graying hair and penetrating eyes leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, I'm William Vega, president of the board. Frankly, we're concerned about the implications of your interest in our zoo." David nodded, maintaining his composure. "I understand your concern, Mr. Vega, but I assure you that my intentions are purely philanthropic. I'm not looking to take control of the zoo, as certain unfounded rumors suggest. My goal is to support the valuable conservation programs that Dr. Parker has described to me." As David spoke, he noticed that some board members began to relax, but others maintained their defensive posture. "And how can we be sure there isn't a hidden agenda?" asked a middle-aged woman, her tone skeptical. David took a deep breath. "Ma'am, I've dedicated my life to building a company based on integrity and transparency. I'm willing to sign any legal agreement the board deems necessary to ensure that my support is exactly that. Support, not an attempt at control." The discussion continued for hours. David answered question after question, explained his vision for the future of the zoo, and how his company could contribute without interfering with the existing administration. Meanwhile, at the Thompson residence, Sarah was dealing with an equally delicate situation. Emily, still disturbed by what she had heard at the zoo, was refusing to go to school. "Honey," Sarah said, sitting next to her daughter on the bed, "I know you're worried, but your dad is working to solve all this." Emily looked up, her eyes full of tears. "But Mom, those men said very mean things about Dad. What if they hurt him?" Sarah hugged her daughter, fighting against her own fears. "Your dad is strong and brave, Emily. Besides, he has the truth on his side. That's more powerful than any lie." At that moment, Sarah's phone vibrated. It was a message from David. "Meeting over. It was tough, but I think we've made progress." "I love you," Sarah smiled, feeling momentary relief. "Look," she said to Emily, showing her the message, "Dad's okay. Everything's going to be all right." Back at the zoo, David was leaving the boardroom when he came face to face with Mike. The guard looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. "Mr. Thompson," Mike mumbled, I wanted to apologize for my behavior during your visit." David, surprised by this unexpected turn, studied Mike's face. He saw shame, but also something else: fear, internal conflict. "I appreciate your apology, Mike," David responded calmly, "but I feel there's something else troubling you." Mike looked nervously around before speaking in a low voice. "Sir, there are things happening in this zoo, things that aren't right. My brother, the owner, he..." Before Mike could finish, An authoritative voice echoed in the hallway. "Mike, what are you doing?" Tom, Mike's brother and the zoo owner, was approaching with large strides. His gaze alternated between his brother and David, full of suspicion. "Nothing, Tom," Mike responded quickly. "I was just apologizing to Mr. Thompson for a misunderstanding." Tom narrowed his eyes. "Good. Now, get back to your post. And you, Mr. Thompson, if you've finished your meeting, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave. We have a lot of work to do." David maintained his composure, but noticed the tension between the brothers. "Of course. Thank you for your time, gentlemen." As he walked away, David couldn't help but feel that he had just scratched the surface of something much deeper and murkier than he had initially imagined. That night, at the family dinner, David shared the day's events with Sarah and Emily. "The board seems to be divided," he explained. "Some are open to the idea of collaboration. Others are more resistant. But what concerns me is what happened afterwards with Mike and his brother." Sarah exchanged a look with Emily before speaking. "David, there's something you need to know. Yesterday, when we went to the zoo," as Sarah recounted what she and Emily had overheard, David felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fit together. "This is more complicated than we thought," David murmured, running a hand through his hair. "It's not just about prejudices or misunderstandings. There's something else happening in that zoo, something that Tom is trying to hide." Emily, who had been listening attentively, spoke with surprising determination for her age. "Dad, does this mean you're not going to help the tigers anymore?" David looked at his daughter, moved by her concern. "No, Princess. This means we have to work even harder to help them. Because now it's not just about the animals, but about doing what's right." Sarah took her husband's hand. "What are we going to do?" David took a deep breath, his mind already tracing a plan. "We're going to get to the bottom of this, for the sake of the animals, for the zoo, and for our family. We won't let fear or injustice win this battle." As the Thompson family united in their determination to face the challenges ahead, in another part of the city, Tom Harrison was having a tense phone conversation. Don't worry," he growled into the receiver. "I'll take care of Thompson. No one is going to interfere with our plans for the zoo. No one." Night fell over New York City, concealing secrets and conspiracies, but also the growing resolution of a family willing to fight for what is right. The battle for the zoo was far from over, and the coming days would bring revelations that would shake the foundations of the community and test the strongest bonds. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity for the Thompson family. David divided his time between his company and meetings with Robert, discreetly investigating the situation at the zoo. Sarah, for her part, had decided to use her skills as a lawyer to examine the legal aspects of the case. One afternoon, while David was reviewing documents in his study, Emily entered timidly. "Dad, can I talk to you?" asked the girl, her eyes shining with determination. David smiled, putting aside the papers. "Of course, Princess, what's up?" Emily sat down in front of him, took a deep breath and said, "I want to help with the zoo thing. I know I'm small, but I love animals and I want to do something." Moved by his daughter's passion, David looked at her with pride. "Emily, your love for animals is precisely what we need. What do you say if we organize an awareness campaign at your school?" Emily's eyes lit up. "Yes. We could make posters and tell everyone about the tigers and why they need our help." As father and daughter planned the campaign, Sarah entered the study, her face serious. "David, I just spoke with a contact in the Environmental Regulation Department," she said. "It seems there have been several complaints about the zoo in recent months, but they've all been mysteriously dismissed." David frowned. "This confirms our suspicions. Tom Harrison must have powerful connections to manage to cover all this up." "What are we going to do, Dad?" asked Emily, her voice laden with concern. David looked at his family, feeling the weight of responsibility. "We need more information, and above all, we need allies. We can't face this alone." The next day, David met with Robert in a discreet cafe. The biologist seemed nervous, constantly looking around. "David," Robert whispered, "I've been investigating on my own. Some animals' health records have been altered. I think they're hiding serious negligence." David nodded, processing the information. We need concrete evidence, Robert, and we also need someone inside the zoo who can corroborate this." As if fate had heard his words. At that moment, Mike entered the cafe. Upon seeing David and Robert, the guard seemed to hesitate, but finally approached their table. "Mr. Thompson," Mike said in a low voice, "I need to talk to you. It's about the zoo and my brother." David and Robert exchanged glances. This could be the turning point they needed. Meanwhile, at Emily's school, the awareness campaign was in full swing. The girl and her classmates had created colorful posters about tiger conservation and were organizing a small informational fair. "Did you know that there are only about 3,900 tigers left in the wild?" Emily enthusiastically explained to a group of students and parents. "That's why it's so important to protect them and take care of those in zoos." Among the crowd, Sarah proudly watched her daughter. Suddenly, she noticed a man who seemed out of place, discreetly taking photos with his phone. When their eyes met, the man quickly turned around and disappeared into the crowd. Uneasy, Sarah immediately called David. "I think we're being watched," she said quietly. "Be careful." Back at the cafe, Mike had begun to reveal shocking information about the zoo's practices under his brother's administration. "They've been selling animals illegally," Mike confessed, his voice broken with guilt. "Tigers, mainly. The records show natural deaths, but the truth is they're trafficking them." David felt his blood run cold. "Why did you decide to speak now?" "Mike," the guard looked up, his eyes full of determination, "because I can't be complicit in this anymore, and because I saw how you treated your family, Mr. Thompson. It made me realize I was wrong about many things." At that moment, David's phone vibrated with a message from Sarah. After reading it, he looked at Robert and Mike gravely. "Gentlemen, it seems our investigation hasn't gone unnoticed. We need to act quickly, but cautiously." Robert nodded. "I have some contacts in the press who could help us expose this. And I can provide evidence," Mike added. "Documents, photos, even recordings." David leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Good, but before we go public, we need to make sure our families are safe. Tom and his associates won't stand idly by when this comes to light." As the three men planned their next move, in another part of the city, Tom Harrison was receiving a report from his informant. "The Thompson girl is organizing a campaign at her school," the man said, "and her father is meeting with the guard Mike and the biologist Parker." Tom slammed his desk in fury. "Damn it, they're going too far. It's time to send a clear message to the Thompson family." Night was falling over New York City, and with it, the feeling that a storm was approaching. The fight for truth and justice was about to reach a critical point, and no one could foresee the consequences it would have for all involved. David Twires, arriving home that night, hugged his family tighter than ever. He knew the coming days would be a test of their courage and determination. But looking into Sarah and Emily's eyes, he also knew they had the strength necessary to face any challenge. Together, the battle for the zoo had become much more than a fight for animals. It was a fight for integrity, justice, and the future they wanted to build for their community, and the Thompsons were willing to risk everything for it. The next morning dawned with a palpable tension in the air. David and Sarah, after a night of little sleep and much planning, were preparing to set their strategy in motion to expose the truth about the zoo. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Sarah asked, as she helped David adjust his tie. "You know that once we start, there's no turning back." David took his wife's hands, looking into her eyes. "It's the right thing to do, Sarah. We can't allow them to keep abusing those animals and deceiving the community." At that moment, Emily entered the room, her face a mixture of determination and concern. "Can I skip school today? I want to help." Her parents exchanged a look. Finally, Sarah nodded. "I think it's better if she stays with us, David. At least this way we can keep her safe." Meanwhile, at the zoo, Mike was arriving for his shift with his heart racing. He knew that today would be the day he would betray his brother for the greater good. Every step he took towards the security office felt like he was walking on broken glass. Robert, for his part, was meeting with a trusted journalist in a cafe near the zoo. "I have irrefutable evidence of animal abuse and illegal trafficking," he whispered, sliding an envelope across the table. but I need your word that you'll protect my sources." The journalist, Jennifer Sanders, nodded gravely. "You have my word, Robert. This story needs to be told." Back at the Thompson residence, David was receiving an unexpected call. It was William Vega, the president of the zoo's board of directors. "Mr. Thompson," Vega's voice sounded tense, "I've been reflecting on our last conversation. I think we need to meet again. There are things I must confess to you." David looked at Sarah, who had been listening to the conversation. "All right, Mr. Vega. We'll meet in an hour at my office." While David prepared for the meeting, Sarah decided to take Emily to the nearby park to distract her a bit. However, they had barely arrived when they noticed a black car parked across the street with two suspicious-looking men inside. "Mom," Emily whispered, clinging to Sarah's hand. "Those men are watching us." Sarah, feeling a chill run down her spine, took her daughter and quickly returned home. Once inside, she called David. "I think we're being followed," she said, her voice trembling. "Be careful, honey." In his office, David received the news with a mixture of anger and concern. Just at that moment, William Vega entered, his face pale and sweaty. "Mr. Thompson," Vega began, closing the door behind him. "What I'm about to tell you could cost me my career, even my life, but I can no longer live with this burden." Over the next hour, Vega revealed a web of corruption that went far beyond the zoo. It implicated high-level politicians, influential businessmen, and even connections to organized crime. Animal trafficking was just the tip of the iceberg. "Tom Harrison is nothing but a pawn in a much bigger game," Vega concluded, "and I fear that by investigating the zoo, you've drawn the attention of very dangerous people." David felt the weight of the world falling on his shoulders. What had begun as a desire to help animals had become something much bigger and more dangerous. Meanwhile, at the zoo, Mike was copying the last incriminating files when he heard footsteps approaching. With his heart in his throat, he barely had time to hide the USB drive before his brother Tom entered the office. "Mike," Tom said, his voice unusually soft. "Have you noticed anything strange lately? Anyone asking questions, maybe?" Mike swallowed hard, keeping his face as neutral as possible. "No, brother, everything's been quiet." Tom stared at him for a moment before nodding. "Good. Remember, Mike, family loyalty is the most important thing, don't forget that." At the local newspaper, Jennifer Sanders was frantically working on her article, aware that every minute counted. The evidence provided by Robert was explosive, and she knew that once the story came to light, nothing would ever be the same. As the day progressed, tension in the city grew. David, armed with Vega's information, met with Robert and Mike in a safe location. Together, they decided it was time to act. "Tomorrow at first light," David said, "we'll make public everything we know. Jennifer will publish her article, and we'll hold a press conference. It's risky, but it's our best chance to do justice." That night, the Thompson family gathered in their living room, aware that it could be their last night of relative peace for a while. "No matter what happens," David said, hugging Sarah and Emily, "remember that everything we do for a better future, for a world where truth and justice prevail." Emily, with a wisdom beyond her years, looked at her parents. "I'm proud of you. The Tigers would be proud too." As the family hugged outside, the city was unknowingly preparing for the day that would change everything. The truth was about to come to light, and no one could foresee the consequences it would bring. In his mansion, Tom Harrison was receiving a call. "Sir," said a voice on the other end of the line, "we have information that Thompson plans to make a move tomorrow. What are your orders?" Tom, with a coldness that chilled the blood, responded, "Do whatever it takes to stop him. We can't allow the truth to come to light at any cost." Night fell over New York City, a cloak of darkness that concealed the secrets and conspiracies that were about to be revealed. The fate of many hung by a thread, and dawn would bring with it a storm that would shake the very foundations of society. The Thompson family, united in their determination, prepared to face what was to come. They knew the road would be difficult, but they also knew that together, they had the strength to face any challenge. The stage was set. The final battle for truth was about to begin. The dawn of the following day brought with it a palpable tension that spread throughout New York City. In the Thompson residence, the family was preparing for what would undoubtedly be one of the most important days of their lives. David, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror, took a deep breath. Sarah approached from behind, placing her hands on her husband's shoulders. "We're in this together," she said, their eyes meeting in the reflection. Emily appeared in the doorway, dressed with determination. "Can I go with you? I want to be there when you save the tigers." David and Sarah exchanged glances. Finally, David nodded. "Yes, but promise me you'll do exactly what we tell you, okay?" At the zoo, Mike was arriving early, his heart pounding. The USB drive with the evidence felt like lead in his pocket. As he entered the main office, he came face to face with his brother, Tom. "Good morning, Mike," Tom said, his voice unusually soft. "I hope you slept well. Today will be an interesting day." Mike felt a chill run down his spine. Did his brother suspect something? Meanwhile, at the local newspaper office, Jennifer Sanders was putting the finishing touches on her explosive article. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, aware that each word could change the course of the city's history. At 9 a.m. sharp, David, Sarah, and Emily arrived at City Hall, where the press conference would be held. Robert was already waiting for them there, nervous but determined. "Are we ready?" Robert asked, his voice barely a whisper. David nodded. "It's now or never." As they entered the building, they didn't notice the black car parked on the corner, nor the two men who were watching them intently. At the zoo, Mike took advantage of a moment of distraction to sneak towards the tiger enclosure. He took the USB drive from his pocket and carefully hid it in a crack in the wall near the service door. If anything happened to him, at least the evidence would be safe. Back at City Hall, the press room was rapidly filling with journalists and cameras. David, Sarah, Emily, and Robert took their places on the stage. The atmosphere was charged with expectation. Just as David was about to speak, the doors burst open. Tom Harrison entered, flanked by two intimidating-looking lawyers. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Tom said with a cold smile, "but I think everyone should hear what I have to say before Mr. Thompson makes unfounded accusations." A murmur ran through the room. David felt Sarah squeeze his hand under the table. Tom approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that you have been deceived. Mr. Thompson is not the philanthropist he claims to be. I have evidence that he has been using his supposed interest in the zoo as a front for an elaborate money laundering scheme." The room erupted into chaos. Camera flashes went off. Journalists shouted questions. Emily looked at her parents, her eyes full of fear and confusion. David stood up, his voice rising above the noise. "That's a lie. We have concrete evidence of illegal activities at the zoo, including animal trafficking and..." Suddenly, the lights went out. The room was plunged into darkness and chaos. When they came back on seconds later, Tom had disappeared. "Dad!" Emily cried out. "The bad man took Mom." David turned, horrified. The place where Sarah had been sitting was empty. At that precise moment, Jennifer Sanders burst into the room, waving a copy of her newspaper. "Extra! Extra! Scandal at the city zoo! Animal trafficking and corruption uncovered." The confusion in the room reached new levels. Journalists ran from side to side, divided between Sarah's disappearance and the revelations in Jennifer's article. David, trying to stay calm for Emily's sake, quickly approached Robert. "I need you to stay with Emily. I'm going to look for Sarah." "No, Dad," Emily exclaimed. "I want to go with you." "Honey, it's dangerous," David said, kneeling in front of his daughter. "I need you to be brave and stay with Uncle Robert. I promise I'll bring Mom back." With tears in her eyes, Emily nodded. As David rushed out of the room, his phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "If you want to see your wife again, come alone to the old warehouse next to the zoo. You have 1 hour." At the zoo, Mike was watching the news on the office television in horror. Suddenly, he felt a presence behind him. "So it was you," Tom's voice said. "My own brother, a traitor." Mike turned slowly, facing his brother. "Tom, this has to end. What we've been doing, it's wrong." Tom laughed bitterly. "Wrong, Mike. Do you have any idea what's at stake? This goes far beyond the zoo, beyond you and me." As the brothers confronted each other, David was running through the city streets, his mind a whirlwind of worry and determination. He knew he was heading into a trap, but he had no choice. Sarah needed him. The entire city seemed to be in turmoil. The revelations from Jennifer's article were spreading like wildfire, and everywhere people were talking about the zoo scandal and the mysterious disappearance during the press conference. As David approached the warehouse, he couldn't help but think about Emily. Had he done the right thing by leaving her behind? Would she be safe? In the press room? Emily was staring fixedly at the door through which her father had left. Suddenly, she turned to Robert, her eyes shining with a determination that went beyond her years. "Uncle Robert," she said, "we have to help Dad and Mom, and I know exactly how to do it." The sun reached its zenith over New York City, its rays illuminating a city on the brink of chaos. The truth had begun to come to light, but the price to pay seemed to be getting higher and higher. David, approaching the warehouse, clenched his fists. He didn't know what awaited him inside, but he was willing to face anything for his family and for justice. The final battle was about to begin, and the fate of many hung by a thread. The old warehouse loomed gloomy against the midday sky, its rusty metal walls reflecting the city's scorching heat. David, his heart racing frantically, approached the entrance. Each step he took resonated in the oppressive silence that surrounded the place. "Sarah!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty space. "I'm here. Where are you?" Suddenly, a familiar voice resonated from the shadows. "David, get out of here! It's a trap!" It was Sarah. David ran towards the direction of her voice, but before he could reach her, he found himself surrounded by several armed men. Tom Harrison emerged from among them, a cold smile on his face. "Welcome, Mr. Thompson," Tom said. "I'm glad you decided to join our little meeting." Meanwhile, at the zoo, Mike and his brother continued their confrontation. "Tom, please," Mike pleaded. "We still have time to do the right thing. We can confess, face the consequences." Tom let out a bitter laugh. "Do the right thing? Mike, you're so naive. This goes beyond us. There are powerful people involved. People who won't hesitate to eliminate us if we talk." At that moment, Tom's phone rang. After a brief conversation, his face darkened. "It seems we'll have to postpone this chat, little brother. Mr. Thompson has decided to join us at the warehouse." Mike felt his blood run cold. "What are you going to do, Tom?" "Whatever is necessary to protect our interests," Tom replied, heading for the exit. "So, and I suggest you choose carefully which side you're on." Meanwhile, in the City Hall press room, Emily was insistently tugging on Robert's sleeve. "Uncle Robert, listen to me," the girl said with a seriousness beyond her years. "I know where Mike hid the evidence. He told me in secret when we visited the zoo last time." Robert looked at her, surprised. "Emily, are you sure?" The girl nodded with determination. "It's hidden near the tiger cage. We have to go find it." Robert hesitated for a moment, aware of the danger, but Emily's determined look convinced him. "Okay, but we'll have to be very careful." As Robert and Emily snuck out of the press room, Jennifer Sanders continued her coverage of the scandal. Social media was exploding with the news, and a crowd was beginning to form in front of the zoo, demanding answers. Back at the warehouse, David faced Tom, trying to buy time and find a way out. "What do you really want, Tom?" David asked. "You know the truth will come out sooner or later," Tom smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "What I want, Mr. Thompson, is for you and your family to disappear. You've caused too many problems." At that moment, there was a commotion outside the warehouse. Mike burst into the place, panting. "Tom, we have to go," he shouted. "The police are on their way. Someone tipped them off about this place." Confusion took over the warehouse. Tom, furious, began shouting orders to his men. In the midst of the chaos, David seized the opportunity to break free and run towards where he believed Sarah was. "Stop him!" Tom roared. But before they could reach him, a deafening roar was heard. Everyone froze. Somehow, in the midst of the confusion, the door of a transport cage had opened, and a majestic white tiger emerged. Its eyes shining in the dimness of the warehouse, time seemed to stop. The tiger looked around, its eyes stopping on each person present. No one dared to move. Suddenly, a child's voice resonated in the silence. "Mom! Dad!" Emily had entered the warehouse, closely followed by Robert, who was holding a USB drive high. "We have the evidence," Robert shouted. "It's all here." The tiger, surprisingly, moved calmly towards Emily, as if it recognized her. The girl, showing no fear, extended her hand. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're not going to hurt you." At that moment, police sirens were heard getting closer and closer. Tom, seeing that all was lost, tried to flee, but Mike stopped him. "It's over, brother," Mike said, with a mixture of sadness and determination in his voice. As the police burst into the warehouse, a surreal scene unfolded before their eyes. A white tiger sitting peacefully next to a small girl, a family reuniting in an emotional embrace, and two brothers facing each other in a moment of truth. Outside, the crowd that had gathered in front of the zoo erupted in cheers as news of the arrest spread. Jennifer Sanders, in the midst of the crowd, was broadcasting the events live. "In an incredible turn of events," she reported, "the truth about the zoo scandal has come to light. The Thompson family, with the unexpected help of a white tiger, has managed to expose the network of corruption and animal trafficking." As David hugged Sarah and Emily, surrounded by the chaos of police and reporters, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and amazement. They had faced unimaginable dangers, but together, they had managed to triumph. The white tiger, now carefully surrounded by zookeepers, looked one last time at the Thompson family before being guided back to a transport cage. Emily, with tears in her eyes, whispered, "Thank you, friend. We'll never forget you." As the sun began to set over New York City, a sense of change filled the air. The truth had come to light, and although the road to complete justice would be long, the first and most important step had been taken. The Thompson family, exhausted but united, prepared to face the consequences of their bravery. They knew that the coming days would bring new challenges, but also the opportunity to build a better future, not just for themselves, but for the entire community. The zoo scandal had shaken the foundations of the city, but from the ashes of corruption, a new hope was beginning to emerge. And at the center of it all was a family whose love and determination had proven to be stronger than any adversity. The days following the dramatic climax at the warehouse were a whirlwind of activity for the Thompson family. The entire city seemed to be in a state of shock and transformation. David, Sarah, and Emily found themselves at the center of a media storm. Interviews, statements, and press conferences occupied much of their time. However, amidst the chaos, the family remained united, finding strength in their mutual love. One morning, as they were having breakfast in their kitchen, Emily looked at her parents with serious eyes. "What's going to happen to the zoo now?" "And to the tigers," David smiled, stroking his daughter's hair. "Well, Princess, that's something we've been working on. In fact, we have a surprise for you." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with contained excitement. "We're going to have a very important meeting today at City Hall, and we want you to come with us." Emily's face lit up with anticipation. "Really? Can I go?" Meanwhile, in a cell at the local prison, Tom Harrison was receiving an unexpected visit. Mike and his brother sat across from him, separated by thick glass. "Have you come to gloat?" Tom growled, his voice laden with bitterness. Mike shook his head, his face a mixture of sadness and determination. "I've come to tell you that, despite everything, you're still my brother, and that I hope someday you can see the error of your actions and seek redemption." Tom remained silent for a moment, before responding in a broken voice, "How can you even look at me after what I did?" "Because I believe in second chances," Mike replied, "and because I know that, deep down, there's goodness in you. You just need to find it again." At City Hall, a crowd had gathered in the main hall. Government representatives, activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens filled every available seat. In the front row, the Thompson family took their place, with Emily seated between her parents, her face a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The mayor approached the podium, his voice resonating through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to discuss the future of our zoo, and by extension, the future of our city. Recent events have shaken the foundations of our community, but they have also provided us with a unique opportunity for change and growth. David was invited to speak. With Sarah and Emily by his side, he addressed the audience. What began as a desire to protect animals became a fight for truth and justice. Today, I propose that we transform our zoo into a world-class conservation and education center, a place where animals are protected and respected, and where our children can learn about the importance of preserving nature. David's proposal was met with enthusiastic applause. Detailed plans were presented for the renovation of the zoo, including larger spaces for the animals, research and conservation programs, and innovative educational initiatives. Emily, inspired by her father's words, suddenly stood up and asked to speak. David and Sarah exchanged surprised looks, but nodded with pride. With a shaky voice at first, but gaining confidence with each word, Emily addressed the audience. Animals can't speak for themselves, so we must be their voice. The white tiger showed us that even in the darkest moments, there can be hope and connection. We must protect all creatures, big and small, because they are part of our world just as much as we are. A moved silence followed Emily's words before the room erupted in applause. Tears of pride shone in David and Sarah's eyes. The mayor, visibly moved, took the floor again. I believe I speak for everyone when I say that the future of our zoo couldn't be in better hands. I propose that we name David Thompson as the new director of the Conservation and Education Center, with an advisory board that includes experts like Dr. Robert Parker. The proposal was unanimously approved. Amidst cheers and applause, David hugged his family, overwhelmed by the emotion and responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. In the days and weeks that followed, the transformation of the zoo began to take shape. Animals were moved to larger and more natural spaces, rehabilitation programs for endangered species were initiated, and partnerships were established with schools and universities for educational programs. The white tiger, which had become a symbol of hope and change, was moved to a new and spacious enclosure. Emily was invited to the inauguration ceremony, where she had the opportunity to see the majestic animal up close once again. "Thank you," she whispered to the tiger, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent connection. "Thank you for helping us do the right thing." As the Thompson family watched the new center take shape, they knew this was just the beginning of a long journey. They had faced adversities, unmasked corruptions, and defied expectations. But most importantly, they had demonstrated that with love, courage, and determination, it was possible to change the world, one step at a time. The story of their struggle and triumph would become a legend in the city, inspiring others to raise their voices against injustice and fight for what is right. And at the heart of it all was a girl whose love for animals had sparked a revolution of compassion and change. As the sun set over the newly renovated Conservation and Education Center, David, Sarah, and Emily held hands, their hearts full of hope for the future they had helped create. They knew that challenges would continue, but they were ready to face them, together, as the family they were. The distant roar of a tiger echoed in the air, a reminder of the power of nature and the responsibility we all share in its protection. The Thompson family smiled, knowing they had found their true purpose in life and that their adventure was just beginning. 5 years had passed since that fateful day at the warehouse. New York City had changed, and at the heart of that transformation was the now famous Thompson Conservation and Education Center, formerly known as the City Zoo. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and a crowd had gathered in front of the center's main entrance. Colorful banners and balloons decorated the place, while a large banner announced 5th anniversary celebrating nature's triumph. David Thompson, now with some gray at his temples, stood at the podium, ready to give his opening speech. By his side, Sarah smiled with pride, while Emily, now a 15-year-old teenager, watched the crowd with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "Welcome, everyone," David began, his voice resonating through the speakers. 5 years ago, we gathered here with a dream, to transform this place into a sanctuary for wildlife and a beacon of education for our community. Today, I'm proud to say that dream has become a reality, thanks to each and every one of you. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Among them, Robert Parker, now the center's research director, smiled widely. Next to him was Mike, who had found redemption working as head of security, dedicating his life to protecting the animals he once helped exploit. David continued, "But today we're not just here to celebrate the past, we're here to look to the future. And no one represents that future better than my daughter and Emily. Emily, would you join me, please?" With trembling but determined steps, Emily approached the podium. Her father gave her a reassuring hug before handing her the microphone. Emily took a deep breath and began, "When I was 10 years old, I came here looking to see tigers. What I found was much more a cause, a mission, a reason to fight. Today, as part of the new generation of conservationists, I want to announce the launch of our global youth exchange program for conservation." The audience listened attentively as Emily explained the ambitious project that would allow young people from all over the world to come to the center, to learn, and then take that knowledge back to their communities. As Emily spoke, Sarah couldn't help but let tears of pride roll down her cheeks. She remembered all the challenges they had faced, the threats, the moments of doubt, the nights of worry. But every sacrifice had been worth it to see what her daughter had become. As she finished her speech, Emily was met with a standing ovation. David and Sarah joined her on the podium, forming a perfect image of family unity. The celebration continued with a tour of the center's new facilities. Visitors marveled at the spacious natural habitats, state-of-the-art research laboratories, and innovative educational exhibits. But the most emotional moment came when the Thompson family stopped in front of the white tiger's enclosure. The majestic animal, now older but just as imposing, approached the glass as if recognizing its old friends. Emily placed her hand on the glass, her eyes meeting the tiger's. "Hello, old friend," she whispered. "Look at all we've accomplished together." As they watched the scene, David felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Mike. "David," Mike said with an emotional voice, "I just received news from the prison. Tomta, he's requested to join our rehabilitation program for inmates. He wants to work with the animals when he gets out." David nodded, a mixture of emotions crossing his face. "We all deserve a second chance, Mike, your brother included." As the day progressed, the celebration turned into a community festival. Families enjoyed educational games. Local artists performed nature-inspired acts, and passionate conversations about conservation and sustainability could be heard in every corner. As night fell, the Thompson family gathered on the rooftop of the main building, observing the city lights and the stars that were beginning to appear. "Can you believe everything that's happened?" Emily asked, leaning on her mother's shoulder. Sarah smiled, hugging her daughter. "Sometimes it feels like a dream, but then I look around and see everything we've built, everything we've changed, and I know it's real." David took his wife's hand. "And this is just the beginning. Imagine what we can achieve in the next 5 years, in the next 10. As the family contemplated the future, a distant roar echoed in the night, as if nature itself was celebrating with them. The Thompsons' story had begun with a simple visit to the zoo, but it had become a saga of courage, love, and transformation. They had faced corruption, defied expectations, and in the process had changed not only their own lives but those of an entire community. As the stars shone above them, David, Sarah, and Emily knew their adventure was far from over. Each day would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make the world a better place. And together, as a family, they were ready to face whatever the future held for them. The Thompson Conservation and Education Center had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the smallest actions can trigger monumental changes, and at the heart of it all was a family whose mutual love and passion for nature had inspired an entire city to dream of a greener, more compassionate future. As the night progressed and the celebration continued around them, the Thompsons remained united, their hearts full of gratitude for the journey they had shared and excitement for the adventures yet to come. And so, with the moon illuminating the sky and the distant roar of tigers as background music, the Thompsons' story found not an ending, but a new beginning. A beginning full of possibilities, of dreams to fulfill, and an entire world to change, one animal and one person at a time.